At Allen Junior High in Puyallup, I remember learning about Chief Joseph in history class. It was part of Washington's curriculum, perhaps a bit of a semester on the subject, spoken only in the past. Well, we know the First Peoples are still here and fighting for recognition on many human and legal matters. And there is so much history to learn and unlearn. So I was excited to sit down with Nez Perce Chairman Sam Penney and hear about opportunities to learn about the Nez Perce language and culture. We spoke about Wetxuuwíitin, a collection of artifacts that the Nez Perce brought back, and eventually money also returned to the tribe. So we're going to talk about the artifacts and collections that came back. Do you mind starting from the beginning in the 70s?
My understanding is that, it was discovered that it was back in Oberlin College, stored in the basement in boxes. No one knew they were there. Then eventually the tribe worked out a loan agreement to have those items brought here for display, and they were here for a number of years until at the time, the Ohio Historical Society, which is now the Ohio Historical Connection, won those items back in the mid-90s. So they were on display here for several years, and that's how the collection came here.
And
on
then
a loan agreement.
Then they wanted it back?
Well, at the time, the Ohio Historical Society, I think their executive director, his name was Gary Ness, sent a letter to then Nez Perce National Historical Park Superintendent Frank Walker, saying that they wanted the items returned, and then a little bit later on, then it was almost like a demand letter to return the items.
That must have been really upsetting for...
It was for, especially, not only for the Nez Perce tribe, but look at most comments from elders and others, they all say that those items, rightfully belong here in their homeland. So that was kind of the focus on the fundraising and getting the collection back here.
I had heard, I read that the fundraising in the late 90s was like $600,000.
Well, yes, it's supposed to raise $608,100 within 6 months.
That's insane.
Yeah.
Won the prize in the late 90s?
Yeah.
And then the short amount of time you guys had to raise the funds. What did you do to get the money?
So the full appraisal value was $608,100, so that's what they wanted. And the tribe decided that, we want those. We would try to purchase the items so we could have them here, keep them here in their homeland. So initially we started out, and then we hired Tom Hudson as a fundraiser. And he did a lot of work, as well as we had an elders committee that worked for the tribe to start the fundraising. So that's kind of how it began. And then after that, it went not only nationally here, but internationally to other countries as well.
I'm glad to hear that. So there was support from around the world to get your items back.
Well, some of the documentation I saw was, Switzerland, Japan, Germany, plus some other countries. But the thing that really touched me was a number of school children. I think there were over 50 schools that, donated money. I had the opportunity to go to some of the schools to personally get the money presented to the tribe. And the one I remember the most is at a school in the Boise area where the students had they had 2 water jugs, water jugs. They were full, both full. And so they gave them to me, and they're, of course, quite heavy. I had to take them to the bank, and they had over $800 in that.
The children?
In those water jars. Yeah.
Oh, with all their pennies and coins.
Yeah, all coins.
Why did that touch you?
Well, just that they saw the importance that those items belonged here. They thought it was the right thing to do, I think, in most people's mind, especially the children. We get letters from children, even today around the world, interested in Nez Perce tribe history and wanting to know more about the tribe. So I think just, what at that young, especially at that young age, to recognize the importance of the items and recognize the importance of those items being here in Nez Perce homeland.
It's beautiful that the young and innocent ones recognize the truth before the grown-ups.
Right.
So you essentially bought back your own things. What were those items, if you could describe for the listener?
Well, there's several. I can't remember all of them. There's quite a collection, but the ones I remember are of course, the women's dress, the cradle board. Yeah. I made 2 trips back to Columbus, once to Columbus and then once to Lima, Ohio, where the cradle board was. Just the design of it and the beadwork that was on it, and its value alone at that time was $25,000. So I think that item, the women's dresses, some of the other items that were within the collection, and I think just the nature of the artistic nature and the way that they constructed those items are important to not only to them at the time, but now, because we have people come and see how they're designed, and tribe members can come in and study those items and use them in their own making of their own traditional regalia.
To learn from the past?
Yes.
To continue the craft.
Right.
Oh, that's good. And when you were there, was there a moment when the box was opened? What did that feel like for you?
Well, most of the items were already here. They were still here, and we went back. When I went back to meet with the Board of Trustees, and we were discussing the sale of the items, return of the items. And I think there's a big difference from my view and others' views at the time when they're Ohio Historical Society. I think they were looking at more of the monetary value and the value that it might mean to their constituents, and not really looking at the cultural and historical value that it had for the tribe. But when they became the Ohio Historical Connection, they had a little bit of different outlook on. In a letter, they indicated to myself and to the Nez Perce Tribe Executive Committee that they were unaware until recently that the tribe had to purchase those items back.
So they had a new board, new leadership after a couple of decades, and then they wrote you and said, "Oh my gosh, this should not have happened." Then what? Did they come and say sorry?
Well, early on, I had a couple of calls from their executive director and CEO. He talked about the items and wanting to meet with the tribe. So, and had indicated in their earlier letter that the board had voted in September of 2021 to return the funds to the tribe. And I commend the board for their action. I think one of the key things, they had a gentleman named Chief Billy Friend that's on the Board of Trustees, who's Native American, and I think by having him and Alex and others that understand tribal history, culture, and traditions, that I think that probably helped.
When I read about that in the paper, I was overwhelmed with joy, but a bit like restitution. Like, yeah, you should have, that's the right thing to do. And when it comes to these artifacts, I find that, well, I believe there's some federal laws now that you can't just dig things up and take them for yourself, right?
Yes. Well, Congress passed the Native American Graves Repatriation Act. I think that was a very important step in making sure that on the tribes that are affected, that they're repatriated to those tribes. And it also, I think, it requires museums to submit an inventory of items that are affiliated with the tribe, in this case, Nez Perce Tribe.
Stay connected with NWPB by following us on Facebook, Twitter, and Instagram. Search NWP Broadcasting on any of these platforms and press the follow button. That's NWP Broadcasting on Facebook, Twitter, and Instagram, and you will never miss a post from us.
What are your thoughts about buying back your own things? Now, I know that they gave money back, but the tribe is also buying land, which should be yours anyway.
Well, on the Spalding-Allen collection, just the way they were collected and the value at that time, I don't know what it was, wasn't very much, $57 or a little bit more than that, and then compared to the $608,000, I guess just the thought of those items, leaving their homeland. And one elder mentioned to me, my ancestors or your ancestors wore these items at some time through the Nez Perce culture and tradition. Those type of items are handed down to family member to family member. So, if those items would have remained here initially, they would have eventually been handed down to someone else, usually within their family. So, they just rightfully belonged here. As far as land, that's always a difficult question, because I often think about the tribe, repurchasing land that is our traditional homeland, still within our Nez Perce Tribe 1855 treaty area, and especially in northeast Oregon, where they were actually forced off the reservation and onto the current reservation, which is 1863 boundary, and Nez Perce Tribal members still to this day refer to the 1863 treaty as the Steele Treaty. Not all agreed, not all chiefs agreed to that treaty, and I always think of Chief Joseph's story. Say someone comes to you, or someone comes to me and asks me if I want to buy my horses, and I tell him no. Then he goes to my neighbor, and my neighbor says, yes, I'll sell you Joseph horses. He says, well, it sounds like, what right does someone else have to sell my homeland? So that's kind of the comparison. And, a lot of tribe members, including myself, really still think about, how the land was acquired. And even when I drive, I live in Kamia, Idaho, about almost 70 miles from here, but, driving through there, that thinking, all this, it's Nez Perce tribal land, through homesteading, General Allotment Act, all the federal laws that impacted the tribe. But I think the tribe has consulted with our tribe members through what's called the Snake River Basin Adjudication Settlement, which is a water rights settlement, which the tribe received funds. But the number one priority from the survey of tribe membership was land purchase.
Well, I know with the recent administration, it feels more supportive. Do you feel like in recent years, tribal needs and concerns are getting more attention than it did in the past?
Well, I think in the last, of course it varies depending on which administration. I was first elected in 1989. I currently serve my 10th three-year term. So over those years, some secretaries might be favorable to tribes, others not. It just depends on the administration. Right now we have administration that's favorable to the interests of the tribes and are trying to involve the tribes more and more. One of my nephews, is senior advisor to one of the departments at the Department of Commerce regarding fisheries.
Nice.
So we have people that I think within administration that understand the tribal interests, the tribal values, and hopefully that will move us along getting some of the things done that we...
Is it hard to explain tribal values to non...
It is. It's sometimes it's continuous. I mean, I hear a lot of the tribalists say, well, we educate, then we re-educate, and then, if a new administration comes in, you start all over again. And we do provide trainings or information to whoever requests it.
But what about just the average Joe? How does a person learn about tribal ways of life and what is sacred to you so they could better understand it?
Well, I think we are making progress as far as getting Native American teachers in the classrooms, and I think that's really helped. And the tribes in the area, Nez Perce Tribe's been involved in several advisory boards. I've been personally involved with the advisory board to the president at WSU, advisory board at U of I and at LCSC. So we talk about a number of things, not only recruitment and retention, housing, all those things, but we also talk about some of the academic programs that are offered. And a good example, I guess, as far as culture is that at Lewis and Clark State College, you can take Nez Perce language as a language requirement for credit.
Wow.
So it's working cooperatively with for a lot of the school districts, they can take courses for college credit.
Excellent.
Yeah. So I think there's been a lot of progress made as far as educational opportunities.
I feel like more Native news needs to be in the mainstream because I don't like that I grew up not knowing individual names of tribes in the Northwest. So more exposure would be good for everybody, I think.
Yeah, and I think through the, Nez Perce has a Nez Perce Tribe website, and then, as I mentioned earlier, we do send staff to do trainings for different entities, and our staff, our cultural resource staff, are always willing and able to help. So young girl says, "Well, I'm studying Nez Perce, I want to know more."
Oh.
So they'll send them information, usually through email, and
That's wonderful.
I think that's a good start. At those young people, wanting to learn more about not only the Nez Perce tribe but certain other tribes. So
Yeah.
I think that's a way to help them understand that there are different cultures, there are different people,
And different ways of thinking, and it doesn't have to be scary.
Did you know you can find us on NPR's podcasts? Just look up Traverse Talks at npr.org and enjoy.
Chairman, what do you want people to understand about the Nez Perce?
Well, if you look back in history, prior to Lewis and Clark expedition, during the Lewis and Clark expedition, in a lot of the places I've been on behalf of the tribe, have the opportunity to meet with congressmen, senators, and met several presidents. Been able to go to the White House several times. And I think it's just the Nez Perce people, and you look back in history, they always see that the Nez Perce people were friendly people. They were hospitable. I remember a former senator said, when I was back in Washington, D.C., at the U.S. Capitol at a reception, he introduced me. He says, "Well, if it weren't for the Nez Perce tribe, the expedition would never survive." No. And then I went invited to the U.S. Navy Club in Washington, D.C. for lunch. And I walked in there, and then I see a picture of Chief Joseph on the wall. I think that clear back to then, our ancestors were understood, what it meant to look out for not only what's currently going on, but future generations. And that's even like a lot of the work that we do as Nez Perce Tribe Executive Committee. It's not, it might not happen within the next few months, few years, but might be several years down the road that we're trying to protect the interests of the tribe. But I think the tribe been very resilient in even though the intent of the federal government through some of their federal policies, a lot of us would exterminate the Indians. And a lot of our tribe members, especially elders, says, we're here, we're going to be here, we're going to be here forever, and that you do need to work with us because we're going to be here, and we're going to continue to fight and protect our rights that we've reserved.
Yeah. I have two more questions, maybe a little difficult. One is about what was happening in Canada when they found graves of children at former Indian schools. Were Nez Perce people taken away too to Indian schools?
Yeah, there were Indian schools. The most recent one I saw was Carlisle Indian School in Pennsylvania. A gentleman sent a list of children that were buried there. I don't know if they were all children, but he sent a list of Nez Perce that were buried there in Pennsylvania. And then there were boarding schools here in this area, in other areas. And it's just heartbreaking when you see those children, in many instances, forcefully taken away or forced to go, then be away from their families. I can't imagine how it'd be any of us would feel if we were young and if we're forcibly told to go somewhere and not see your family, for months or years, or maybe not forever. But it's hard to imagine what you may never know what everything that they went through. And that's what you read a lot, where some of them running away. A lot of them ran away because they didn't want to be there.
Yeah, don't blame them. And part of that was part of the genocide of dismantling the Native American people, right? Taking their children away so that there would be this break in passing down culture. How has the Nez Perce been able to hold on to culture if there's been all these outside forces trying to dismantle it?
The best example I can think of right now is the Nez Perce language program. We have elders, some have since passed in the last few years, that were strong advocates to teach Nez Perce language. A lot of them did it on their own.
Wow. And I saw you have a dictionary.
Yeah, and there's a gentleman named Aoki did a Nez Perce dictionary that a lot of people use, and then the Nez Perce, our language staff developed a Nez Perce tribal app where you can download the app. So young children, and I'll use my grandchildren as examples, still very young, they're being taught Nez Perce language, and I think that just the survival of Nez Perce language has been important. And then we have that generation where, including my mother, this whole group that I often wonder, well, why didn't they teach us more Nez Perce language? But they were of that generation where they were punished. You read accounts where some were whipped for speaking their language. So after I thought more about that, I think they just didn't want us to have to deal with that. But I think with the revitalization of the Nez Perce language, my grandchildren, I have to tell people, I said, they probably know more Nez Perce language than I do, because they started, that's when you have to start, not young. And then that's how they learn it.
Yeah. Language is such a binding factor for culture, for sure. Well, Chairman, thank you so much for this conversation.
Well, you're welcome. I'm glad to be here.